It's one of the facts of life that sometimes the most common things are also the most misunderstood. Inflation is ubiquitous, and despite its many beneficial aspects when taken in moderation, it's met with almost universal derision from the public. Because of this, its inverse deflation is often held up as a good thing, when, in fact, it's quite the opposite. Starting with the definition, deflation is a decrease in the general price level of goods and services. It typically occurs during economic downturns when aggregate demand dries up, but it can also be caused by a contraction in the money supply or when there's an overproduction of cheap goods. There are three main reasons why deflation is bad. The first, and most commonly cited, is that people delay their purchases. Many consumers would elect to wait on buying a new car or house if they can buy it for fewer dollars in the future. In effect, the rising purchasing power of currency means it acquires a positive interest rate, so people are much more likely to sit on it rather than go on a spending spree. Deflation and inflation can thus be viewed as a continuum of pushing purchases towards the future with deflation and pushing them towards the present with inflation. Now, people can't defer their purchases forever, so things would eventually stabilize, but the problem rests in the timing. Deflation often occurs during recessions, which is the exact worst time to have people start delaying purchases. Businesses that were already shaky from the economic conditions could collapse altogether if people decide to hold off on buying things for a while. This is the possibility of becoming a vicious circle, with delayed purchases leading to bankruptcies of businesses, leading to a worsening of the economy, leading to more deflation. The next problem with deflation is its effects on wages. It's a well-established phenomenon in human psychology that we dislike losing things more than we like gaining them. This loss aversion comes to the forefront when deflation is present. Take a hypothetical example where a person is employed for $10 an hour and sandwiches sell for $5. Hence, this individual can buy 2 sandwiches for 1 hour of labor. Now let's say deflation of 20% happens, knocking down the price of everything in the economy. Sandwiches are now $4 and the guy makes $8 an hour. He can still buy exactly 2 sandwiches for 1 hour of labor, so if he was a completely rational economic agent, i.e. a robot, he would be totally indifferent to this, as his purchasing power hasn't changed. Everything that requires money now just requires 20% less, both for purchases and for income. In reality, however, people hate a reduction in the amount they're paid far more than they enjoy paying lower prices for everything. When companies cut wages, even if purchasing power is exactly the same, it leads to plummeting employee morale, decreased productivity, increased turnover, and could cause some employees to even sabotage their workplace. Because of all this, the better option for many employers is to just fire otherwise hardworking employees whenever they would have to adjust wages downward for deflation, thus unnecessarily spiking unemployment, which hurts the economy. And remember, hurting the economy leads to more deflation, so this creates another vicious cycle. The final issue with deflation is how it impacts debt. The interest rate on loans is typically calculated by projecting what inflation will look like in the future and tacking this onto the charge for lending money. If inflation is lower than expected, or if it goes all the way to deflation, the debtor will effectively be paying back more. For example, if a person takes out a $10 loan with an expected inflation rate of 0% and a real interest rate of 20%, he'll pay back $12 in a year. The debtor usually spends the money from the loan shortly after receiving it, and if inflation is as expected, he repays the typical real amount after a year, and everything will be as agreed. However, let's assume that sudden deflation of 50% were to occur after the loan money was spent, but before it was paid back. The purchasing power of every dollar has effectively doubled, but he'll still have to pay back the agreed upon sum of $12. The nominal value of the loan has stayed the same, but the real value that has to be paid back has doubled. The problem for the economy as a whole is that even though the purchasing power is just transferred from debtor to creditor, the creditor is very unlikely to increase his consumption as much as the debtor decreases his. The overall effect is that aggregate demand falls, hurting the economy and creating yet another vicious cycle. And don't think deflation acts as karmic justice by punishing people who spend beyond their means and rack up huge amounts of credit card debt. It does hurt them a bit, but this debt distortion most heavily affects long-term agreements such as student loans and mortgages, as deflation has a longer time to dramatically alter the real value that needs to be paid back. These 3 reasons are not the only issues with deflation. Furthermore, there can be some benefits to a sustained decrease in prices, especially to individuals with fixed incomes. But the empirical evidence is that deflation wreaks economic havoc and should be avoided whenever possible. Many researchers believe that deflation increased the length and severity of the Great Depression. For a more modern example, Japan's miracle economy of the 80s gave way to recession and stagnation in the 90s and 2000s. The country slid into deflation and has been trying to claw its way back out for years, but it's been hampered by the fact that deflation is a self-perpetuating phenomenon. That's why many economists call it a deflationary trap. It's a trap we should avoid falling into.